keep participating economies from falling apart without them. Most countries are members of the World Trade Organization, which regulates international trade agreements and maintains the global economy. But one of the problems with free trade agreements is that they can also hurt consumers. For example, in 2011, tobacco giant Philip Morris sued the country of Australia for implementing anti-smoking regulations. The company argued that the regulations would violate a portion of a 1993 trade agreement between Hong Kong and Australia because plain packaging would diminish their trademark. And even though the lawsuit failed to stop restrictions, it is an example of free trade agreement overreach. A much more common complaint, especially in the US, is that free trade agreements lead to outsourcing and a loss of American jobs. When the North American Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA, was established between the US and Canada and Mexico in 1994, it eliminated most taxes on imports and exports between those countries. This made it cheaper to import food and goods from Mexico than it was to grow or make them in the United States. This led to considerably cheaper goods and a net benefit for consumers. However, the trade agreement also led to outsourcing those same farming and manufacturing jobs to Mexico. It's been estimated that 1 million jobs have been lost to NAFTA over the past 2 decades. In short, a free trade agreement makes it easier for foreign countries to compete with local production, making everything less expensive according to free market principles. But for those workers who actually have to compete with cheaper foreign labor or resources, they're often forced to find new work. There are also a huge number of other considerations besides actual trade that go into free trade agreements, like environmental and copyright concerns. In the end, free trade agreements can make goods cheaper and more available. However, this benefit can come at the expense of thousands, if not millions, of jobs. The TPP is one such free trade agreement that has received major criticism. But what exactly is that trade agreement about?
In recent years, the Obama administration has put its full weight behind fast-tracking the Trans-Pacific Partnership, eliminating Congress's ability to edit or stall the agreement. In response, WikiLeaks recently released classified documents from the secret arrangement and condemned the partnership in a press release. So what's the big deal? The U.S. has fast-tracked a number of trade agreements between countries in the last decade. So what's so scary about the Trans-Pacific Partnership? Well, first of all, this agreement covers a huge section of the world. It governs international investments and trade regulations between the United States, Australia, Brunei, Canada, Chile, Japan, Malaysia, Mexico, New Zealand, Peru, Singapore, and Vietnam. Together, these countries represent more than 40% of the world's GDP and make for the single largest economic treaty ever. The most recent WikiLeaks documents revealed that the partnership establishes extrajudicial courts in which corporations can potentially sue countries over laws and policies that affect a company's future profits. This is a huge deal. Imagine a tobacco company suing a country because their anti-smoking regulations could potentially hurt the company's profits. Sound unlikely? Well, in 2011, tobacco giant Philip Morris used some clever legal maneuvering to sue Australia for that exact reason on the basis of an outdated trade agreement with Hong Kong. The Obama administration has promised that the deal will increase jobs, boost U.S. exports, and lower tariffs on U.S. products in Asia, which will let the U.S. compete more aggressively against China. However, economists like Robert Reich has called this a global race to the bottom. That's an economic term for when governments reduce regulations and taxes in order to attract investing companies. This practice has the added effect of lessening labor laws, lowering wages, and raising the rate of outsourcing. Additionally, Democratic Senator Ben Cardin has voiced concerns that 3 of the countries, Brunei, Malaysia, and Vietnam, have histories of human rights abuses. Since 2012, there have been a number of protests and petitions to stop the TPP, or at the very least, to release the information within the agreement. In a surprising twist, several House Democrats have vehemently opposed the idea of fast-tracking the deal, while Republicans have shown strong support for the president. So what's so bad about the Trans-Pacific Trade Agreement? In short, it's a classified deal that creates an international court not bound by the laws of any country, that allows companies to sue countries over potential lost profits. Although supporters of the deal say that it is a means of future economic growth, WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange warns that similar tribunals have already been shown to chill the adoption of sane environmental protection, public health, and public transport policies. With nearly 800 million people likely to be affected by this agreement, shouldn't we know what's in the agreement before it becomes law? Lobbying behind closed doors is a huge part of the American political system. To learn more about how it works, check
Lobbyists play a big role in American politics. They get bills passed, politicians elected, and national programs funded. But according to a 2013 Gallup poll, only 6% of Americans view lobbyists as honest or ethical. So how is it that one of our most politically influential groups is also one of the least trustworthy? Let's start by looking at what lobbying actually is. The National Conference.
This year, 2 news anchors, one in the UK and one in the US, quit their jobs at Russian-run television networks because they were no longer willing to pass off false information.
The United States has more than $17 trillion in debt, and each year the government borrows more. They do this because it costs more money to run the country than the country currently earns in taxes. This is called a budget.
8 African nations are currently involved in serious armed conflicts. Africa also has 17 of the 20 poorest nations in the world and an Ebola outbreak. Yet despite all of that, at the African Summit recently held in Washington, D.C., President Obama announced a $14 billion commitment to Africa from various U.S. corporations. This isn't money going toward humanitarian aid or economic relief. It will be spent by U.S. businesses to set up opportunities and infrastructure with the sole goal of expanding into new African markets. So, is Africa a poor, war-torn continent with huge problems like disease? Or is it the next boomtown for savvy business people? Well, it's really not that simple. The economic standing and political stability of African nations vary widely. There are places like the Democratic Republic of Congo that have been war-torn for decades and are showing little economic growth. Right next to places like Angola, which has had the same president since 1979, and however corrupt he may be, it is showing extreme growth. Last decade, Angola's GDP grew at 11.1% per year, which is the highest growth of any nation worldwide. This is partially due to their vast supply of natural resources, partially due to an investment in Angola from China to monetize those resources, and partially due to the fact that Angola's economy started at the bottom and had a lot of room to grow. And that's the thing about economic growth. Poor or war-torn nations with huge problems can be the nations with potential for enormous economic growth. It sounds wrong, and some would argue that it's morally problematic, but it is a reality of the current economic landscape. China has a recent history of investing in these types of nations, and now their annual trade across all of Africa is about $200 billion. That's almost twice as much as the US, and it's a gap that American businesses would like to close. If you found this video informative, please subscribe to the channel. Hitting the subscribe button on the screen or down below is